Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering Puzzle Quest video. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the chase cards that I have selected from the upcoming Kamigawa Neon Dynasty set. So, let's get into it. Now, as you can see, I've broken it down by rarity, so I've got the masterpieces, the mythics, the rares, the uncommons, and the commons. So I'm going to be going over each of the rarities one at a time. I should clarify that when I say that these are my chase cards, it's a combination of cards that I think are worth chasing and a combination of cards that I think are worth just looking out for, right? Because for mythics and masterpieces, those are the cards you're going to be chasing. Those are the cards you're going to be using your mana jewels for. So those are the more targeted cards that you can try and pick up as non-duplicates. Whereas for the commons, uncommons, and rares, those are more cards that you're just going to be looking out for as you're opening packs. So let's go ahead and start with the masterpieces. Now, this is a pretty interesting set in that we have a really good combination of cards that are like absolute bombs, and then also some really good control elements. And then furthermore, it's also nice because there's a lot of cards in the higher rarities that are going to be worth looking out for. But there's actually an incredible amount of cards in the common, uncommon, and rare range that are going to be worth looking out for as well. By and large, one of the best ways of doing it is if it's a card that needs one of the new mechanics, then it's probably not a card that you're going to be looking out for. But if it's a card that doesn't need one of the new mechanics, then it might well be really, really good. So the first of the masterpieces is Higure, the Still Wind. This was a paper card in the original Kamigawa block. It was the second set with the little shuriken. I'm forgetting the name of it. It was the one that Umezawa's Jite came out in originally. It was a terrible set in paper, but nonetheless, Higure is going to be a pretty decent card in Puzzle Quest. It's 15 for a 3/4. It has Ninjutsu 6, which means that if you ever actually cast this for the Ninjutsu, you've probably got a problem in your deck. Ninjutsu 6 is a pretty high cost. You're better off just paying the 15. And then it has, when this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, pick one of the first 4 ninja cards from your library, fetch that card, and give it half of its mana. It also has an activate 3 blue to give a creature you control unblockable, but I really don't see why you would ever really need that in Puzzle Quest. Well, not ever. There's actually some cards in the set that might make it so you'd want that, but it's not a necessary ability. The really big key part is this: pick one of the first 4 ninja and fetch it and give it half of its mana. So what I really like about Higure is that this is giving you fetch and mana to creatures. And so that's going to enable a lot of cast and summon objectives that you're going to meet in the game. We have a tremendous amount of those objectives in events. And so I think that Higure is going to be a card that's going to be really good to play in events in order to complete objectives. Having only 3 power for 15 mana means that it's not going to be much of a kill card. It's more just an enabler for you to complete objectives, meaning that outside of events, you might not use this card so much unless you're specifically making a ninja deck. There are some other ninja that are pretty ridiculous in the set. The other thing that I like about Higure is that it has when this deals combat damage instead of when it attacks. So if you give this thing double strike, then you're going to be able to pick 2 ninja and give both of them half mana when it attacks. So there's definitely a lot of utility in this card, and I think it's going to be a card that's going to be worth picking up. The next one is another ninja. It's Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni. I do not think that Ink Eyes is as good as Higure is, but nonetheless, I think it's going to be a good card. So it's 15 for a 5/4. It also has Ninjutsu, but as Ninjutsu 8 is incredibly prohibitive. Ninjutsu 6 was bad. Ninjutsu 8 it's worse. So I once again don't really see you casting this for the Ninjutsu. However, it has, when this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, return the last creature from target graveyard to the battlefield under your control. His activate is going to make it so that it gets regenerate 3 until the beginning of your next turn. It doesn't have like Berserker or anything like that, so I really don't see it losing very much toughness. And I mean, well, its toughness is only 4 anyways, so if it's losing toughness, it's probably just going to die. So it's not like you're going to get a lot out of that regenerate. But nonetheless, being able to return a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield every single turn is a really good ability, especially with all of the black planeswalkers that we have that are going to dump cards into the graveyard. So this is more of like a niche card that I think will be pretty cool to play with. And it's a card that I personally want to pick up as I like playing with graveyard decks. But it's not a card that I think that you need to actively like chase. It's a card that I think will be good to have. And if you pick it up, I think that you can have a lot of fun with it. But there's a lot of other cards that have a very similar ability in the game. So if you like those cards, you're going to like Ink Eyes. Next on the list is March of the Machines. This is just sort of an obligatory add because Old Gnawbone exists in Standard right now. So this is a 12 mana support that reads, at the beginning of your turn, your first creature gets +X. X is the sum of the shields of all artifact supports you control. If you didn't know, sum means additive, so you basically add the shield count for all of your artifact supports. If you play Old Gnawbone in a Kasmina deck, you use Kasmina's third ability to give all of your gold tokens 6 more shields. Then you're going to be able to make quite the big bomber with March of the Machines. So I see this as being a really cool card to play with Old Gnawbone. It's more of like a fun card. It's definitely not a card that you need to chase just because, I mean, Gnawbone is going to kill your opponent anyways, and there's probably going to be better things to use your mana for. But nonetheless, I think it's a really cool combo. And so I know that a lot of you like combos, so I wanted to add that in there as something that's pretty cool that you'll be able to do with some other cards. And Gnawbone is a very accessible card because Fiblethip has Gnawbone like every few weeks. So yeah. The next one, or the next two, are going to be my 2 big chase cards for the Masterpiece range for the set. So the first of them is O Kagachi, Vengeful Kami. So this is a Dragon Spirit, 20 mana, 6/6, and it has when it deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker. If your opponent controls more cards than you, that includes supports, but it will not include cards in their hand, exile an opposing card at random. So it's going to exile something on the battlefield that your opponent has. Otherwise, opponent creatures can't attack until the beginning of your next turn. So I see this as being a potentially really useful card just for completely locking your opponent down. Making it so that your opponent's creatures can't attack is very useful. And I could see this being a really good card to play in a Timeless Voyage, which is a really nasty event. So your opponent can overwhelm you pretty easily. And so if you're able to get a card advantage over your opponent on the battlefield, say you pair this thing with Old Gnawbone, then you'll be able to just completely lock down your opponent, get a ton of mana, and you'll be in pretty good shape. So I think that this one is going to be a very powerful card. However, I think the best card in the Masterpiece range in the set is without a doubt this Silent Blade Oni. This is the number 1 chase card in the set that I would go for, actually, in the Masterpiece range. So if you want to save up your jewels for a Masterpiece, this is without a doubt going to be the one you want to try and pick up. Silent Blade Oni is a 19 mana 6/5 with Ninjutsu 8. You're not going to use the Ninjutsu. What you are going to use is when this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, create a copy of the first card in your opponent's hand in your hand, give it full mana, and then your opponent discards their first card. So pretty much anytime this thing deals combat damage to your opponent, they're going to discard their first card, and it's going to be attacking every turn. So every turn, your opponent's going to lose their first card. It's going to be wildly difficult for your opponent to get rid of this thing. Because it's getting rid of your opponent's first card, this thing is going to provide you with an almost unparalleled amount of control. If you thought that Time Bubble gems were frustrating, this thing is going to be even more so potentially. Then, if you want to factor in that this thing is also blue and you can run this with the Puzzle Masters Teferi, I see this as being a card that I will personally throw into almost every blue or black event deck that I run, because once you get the thing down, you're going to win games. So beware of this card. This is going to be an absolute game changer when you go up against it or when you play with it. It's very, very powerful. If you give this thing double strike, then you're going to be discarding your opponent's first 2 cards every turn. And then on top of that, not only are you providing that control, but you're getting a free card with mana every turn as well. So that is it for the Masterpieces. Next up is going to be the Mythics. So for the Mythics, there is a solid number of them that I would keep an eye out for. At the very least, some of them I would definitely chase and spend some mana jewels to pick up. The first of those is Ao the Dawn Sky. So Ao the Dawn Sky is a 5/4 flying defender lifelink, and it is white. So Kind of one of the bigger deals to me about this one is that it has both flying and defender, and that it is white, which means that you can use this with the Puzzle Master's Ajani. You use Puzzle Master's Ajani's third ability to give this thing prevent damage, and now you've got something with flying, defender, prevent damage, and lifelink. So if you don't have a particularly large collection, I've found that having something with flying and defender is pretty much an auto win in Ajani. I mean, your opponent is going to maybe be able to remove it, but it's pretty hard to get rid of the thing. And it's also going to have, when the creature dies, if you control less than 2 creatures, move the first non-land support or creature card from your library to play under your control. So even if this thing does wind up getting killed, you're going to potentially get something back in return. And then finally, it has otherwise creatures you control get +1/+1, and your creatures with pilot get an additional +1/+1. So the otherwise bit is not very useful. However, the evergreens that this thing has, in conjunction with being a 15 mana 5/4 dragon flyer, along with the when it dies ability, at the very least makes this a useful card, one that you might even wind up using in events as a platinum player. The next one is Explosive Singularity. Burn is always useful. Getting rid of Vanguards is especially useful right now because of how good Teferi, Hero of Dominaria's Vanguard is. This one is 11 mana and has either an opposing Vanguard loses 10 shields, or it's going to deal 10 damage to any opposing target. So either a creature or your opponent. Paying 11 mana to potentially deal 10 damage to a creature or a player is a very good proposition in terms of the cost of a spell for how much damage it's going to do to your opponent. It also has Convoke. That's what this here symbol means. However, I highly doubt that it's going to be Convoke 0, because if it was Convoke 0, then that would be entirely pointless. So we'll have to see how much mana that this spell can be reduced by when we ultimately see the card. It will not be 0 when it comes out. Otherwise, Convoke 0 means it reduces the mana cost by 0. So I imagine it will, if it has Convoke, that it'll be reduced by something. This is a card that I would look out for. It's not one that I would actively pull for with Mana Jewels, once again, but it's one that I would look out for. This next one is Goro Goro, Disciple of Ryusei. So Goro Goro is a card that is really more for newer players, because if you've got a bigger collection at your disposal, a 2/2 for 8 with this ability is not going to do that much for you. However, in bronze, silver, and gold, this is going to absolutely win you games. So it's, as I say, a 2/2 for 8, and it has activate 2 red to give creatures you control and creatures in your hand haste until end of turn. And then if you control a modified creature, create a dragon token. So this can potentially create up to 2 dragon tokens per turn. Dragon tokens are 5/5 flyers, so being able to put out up to 10/10 worth of flying every turn is definitely very useful. We have a lot of red conversion at our disposal, and then this could also potentially go in a Koth deck who's going to be destroying gems anyways. So I don't really see this as being incredibly difficult to activate at least one of the 2 gems most turns. So Goro Goro could definitely be a very solid card if you're a newer player and you pick this up. This could wind up really swinging a lot of matches for you. Our next one is going to be Jin Gitaxias, Progress Tyrant. So this card is like prohibitively good in paper in some ways. In Puzzle Quest, it's just good. So 17 for a 5/5. It has when you cast the first card during your turn. If it's a spell, copy it and give it full mana. And if it's an artifact, then reinforce it. So this is more just that anytime you are able to double cast spells, that's going to be pretty useful in Puzzle Quest. And then having artifacts potentially get reinforced, be it either if it's a support to get more shields or a creature to get more power toughness, that's still going to be a very useful ability. So this is one that might wind up feeling a lot stronger when we play with it, or it might wind up just being a card where it's like, you might as well use something else. But nonetheless, this could wind up being very good. So I wanted to include it on this list. The next one is Kairi, the Swirling Sky. Really quickly, something that's kind of amusing to me, Kairi is the blue dragon, but you'll notice from earlier that Ao is the white dragon, but Ao is blue in Japanese. So for some reason, the Dawn Sky, this white dragon, is named Blue, the Dawn Sky, whereas Kairi is not named blue. So it's not named white either. White is Shiro or Shiroi, but nonetheless. Kairi, the Swirling Sky, is a 16 mana 6/6. It has Defender, Flying, and Ward. The Ward is going to be Ward 9, which is definitely very solid. It's going to be very annoying to try and get rid of this thing apart from just attacking. And then getting rid of it is actually going to be a pretty big problem as well. Because this creature has, when it dies, if your opponent controls more cards than you, return the first opposing creature and a random opposing support to their hand. And then if your opponent does not have more cards than you, then you're going to destroy the top 4 cards of your library and return the first 2 spell cards from your graveyard to your hand and give those half of their mana. This card really looks like a card that will be something that I would play a lot in events because it's going to provide protection for me by being a flying defender. It's going to be hard for your opponent to get rid of with spells because it has ward. And when your opponent does wind up killing this thing, it'll probably wind up taking out some of your opponent's creatures in the process, but then it's also going to wind up getting rid of even more stuff that your opponent controls, or it's going to give you some of your spells back. And so if you've been playing spells, ideally you've got some removal in there, you've got something good in there that you're going to be able to get back. If not, it's going to destroy cards from your library, so maybe it'll just give you free stuff. But nonetheless, this is one card that is going to be able to not only provide you with significant card advantage, but it's going to be able to get rid of stuff from your opponent's side of the field. This doesn't really strike me as like a training grounds monster, but it does strike me as a creature that will be very useful to have for events. So this is one of the mythics that I actually want the most from the set because I could really see this getting a lot of play in events. Which brings us to Kotose, the Silent Spider. So this is 15 mana, it's a 4/4, has no evergreens, it's legendary. But it has, when it enters the battlefield, return the first non-land card from your opponent's graveyard to your hand, give that card 3 mana, then exile the first 2 cards from your opponent's hand, and then exile the first 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard. So there's really a lot to unpack there. It also has, at the beginning of your turn, you may drain 9 mana from your hand to return the first card from your opponent's exile to your hand and give it full mana. But nonetheless, it's really this top ability that strikes me as a pretty incredible ability. However, whether or not this card is going to be either playable or potentially overpowered is going to be based on this then right here. So it reads, when it enters the battlefield, return the first non-land card from your opponent's graveyard to your hand and give it 3 mana. So the thing that I'm wondering is if your opponent doesn't have a non-land card in their graveyard, will you still also then exile the first 2 cards from your opponent's hand? So if this thing is going to be able to exile the first 2 cards from your opponent's hand, regardless of whether or not this first ability part triggers, then this card is going to be absolutely disgusting, especially when paired with the Demon Ninja from earlier, that is going to be getting rid of the first card in your opponent's hand every turn. This thing with something like Prismatic Bridge or something that's going to be flickering it in and out of the battlefield is really just going to be prohibitively strong against your opponent by getting rid of the first 2 cards from your opponent's hand. So there's really a lot of stuff that in this set at the higher end that's going to be messing with players' hands and with the first part of players' hands, which is really scary because that's where you're charging up your mana. So this card could wind up being like an absolute must-have card that winds up being one of the strongest cards in the set, or it could just wind up being more of a niche okay card based on this return the first non-land card, right? If that's a requirement. I will say that even if it does have that as a requirement, pairing it with something like Infinite Obliteration would definitely make it pretty nasty. But it does also exile cards from your opponent's graveyard, so it might be really good or it might be okay. We'll just have to see. Next on the list is the Sona, Asari Commander. And so this card is actually a really, really cool card. This is really high up on my chase list for the Mythics. So this is 17 mana for a 3/3. It has Vigilance and Haste, and has, when this creature deals combat damage to your opponent's Planeswalker, it gains Prevent Damage and Hexproof. Notice that that doesn't say until end of turn, it just gains Prevent Damage and Hexproof. It then has, when an opposing creature deals combat damage to your opponent's planeswalker, this creature loses prevent damage and hexproof. So basically, as long as opponent's creatures aren't attacking and hitting you, this thing's going to maintain prevent damage and hexproof. So if you're able to give this thing flying, it sort of just turns into a wall that is going to be able to completely wreck your opponent's side of the board. If you've had the great fortune of running up against, say, the Rem Carlos Slayer, and along with, say, Velomachus as a combination where your opponent is going to have something with vigilance and prevent damage, it is really, really good. And this thing will have hexproof on top of the prevent damage, so finding a way to get rid of this thing is going to be really difficult. Part of what I like is that because of the way this ability works, if you were to use this creature in conjunction with the Origins Origins Gideon, or if you were to run it with like Sarah the Benevolent, it'll be really easy to give this thing flying. And then once you've given it flying, you've got a wall that's probably going to win you the game, because it's going to be really hard for your opponent to bypass both prevent damage and hexproof. There's really not a lot in the game that gets rid of both of those things in the lower tiers. And even in the higher tiers, I find that a lot of people don't like running world wipe spells. So world wipe being destroy all. And so this thing would be something that will just make it so you don't lose games. And if you don't lose a game, you win the game. So I like that. I like that a lot. A lot. The next, and I believe final card from the Mythic range is the Mythic that I want the most, next to this one over here, Sona. So I definitely want this one the most. This one's called the Kami War. And so the Kami War is going to serve as removal for all 5 colors, and it is excellent removal at that. So it reads exile for the first chapter, so it's a 3-chapter support. So it reads exile an opposing Vanguard support. If you can't, exile the first opposing creature. If you can't, exile an opposing non-land support. So basically this can exile a Vanguard, a creature, or a non-land support. And so you can play this based on what it is your opponent is going to have out. But nonetheless, because of how Greg plays, Greg being the AI is always going to prioritize playing creatures first. So this will wind up getting rid of those. But nonetheless, this is going to, chapter 1, get rid of something which is good. But then chapter 2 is also going to get rid of stuff, because chapter 2 says return an opposing Vanguard support to the owner's hand. If you can't, return the first opposing creature to the owner's hand. If you can't, return an opposing non-land support to its owner's hand. So even if you were to run this thing with Starfield of Nyx, which will bring back a support that is destroyed, because sagas, upon the conclusion of the 3rd chapter, wind up getting destroyed. They go to the graveyard. Starfield of Nyx will just continually bring this back. And so basically, you'll just cycle between chapter 1, get rid of something, chapter 2, get rid of something, then chapter 3, play a token. So this is going to provide an awful lot of control for one card, and being able to slot it into any color means that every single color is going to have creature removal, every single color is going to have Vanguard removal, and every single color is going to have artifact and enchantment removal for the foreseeable future. So I really like this card. Removal is always good. So this one here is, I think, actually great. And then finally, for the 3rd chapter, you're going to create an Okagachi Made Manifest token. As to what Okagachi is going to do for this particular token, we don't know yet. There's actually a lot of sagas for the set that are going to make some kind of token, and so it could wind up being that more sagas from the set are going to be playable that I do not include in this video. But in paper, at the very least, the Okagachi is going to be a 6/6 flying trample that's going to be all 5 colors like the saga. And it has, whenever Okagachi Made Manifest attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in your graveyard, return that to your hand, and it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the value of the mana cost. So in Puzzle Quest, I could very well see this just bringing us back something from your graveyard to play and then buffing this. I could see it following the paper route and bringing something back to your hand and buffing it. But either way, to get such solid removal between chapters 1 and 2 from the Kami War, and then to get a very solid token as well that is going to be giving you recursion and buffing stuff, that's going to be really good as well. So especially because it has the something the non-land card is going to be returned, it could also very well wind up just propagating itself by just bringing itself back. And then you just continually replay the Kami War, which is going to serve as removal, and then is also going to give you more of these dragon tokens. So it's kind of like its own little win con in and of its own. So I happen to think that this is going to be the best mythic in the set, and it's absolutely going to be the card that I will be chasing the most from the mythic range when Kamigawa Neon Dynasty drops. Our next rarity are going to be the actual rares. There aren't too many different rares from the set that I'm targeting, namely because there's a new land cycle, so that takes up 5 of them, and then beyond that there aren't too many rares that really caught my eye. A lot of the rares seem to really play into the new mechanics, and like I said earlier, the new mechanics are interesting, but I don't think that any of them are particularly great, with a few exceptions, so you're not going to see very many of them on my chase list. So the new land cycle is going to be these new legendary lands with channel. Not all of them have a channel ability that I would use, but I always think it is worth chasing a land that converts to a specific color. So Bosseju, who endures, is the green one. It's going to convert 2 gems to green. All of these lands are going to convert too. The channel ability for Bosseju is going to require that it has at least 8 mana in your hand when you exile it. And if you do, you destroy a random opposing non-Vanguard support. Then your opponent fetches the first land support card from their library and gives that land half of its mana. It also has when a creature with legendary enters the battlefield under your control, if this is in your hand, it gains 3 mana. So I do really like this land in that its channel ability is going to destroy non-Vanguard supports. Namely, it gives you a way of having both gem conversion and a way of destroying the prismatic bridge at the same time. So beyond the prismatic bridge, this is also another way that you could wind up getting rid of Test of Talents. And as you're not actually casting this thing, not that there are counterspells in Puzzle Quest in the traditional sense, but nonetheless, it's going to be pretty easy to make this go off and just get rid of some of the bigger threats that might be on the battlefield in the game. So you're getting conversion, and you're going to be able to get rid of some of the biggest support threats. So definitely a very good card, definitely a card you're going to want to look out for and make sure you have in your collection. The next one is Brilliant Restoration. This is 18 mana, it's a spell, and it returns all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is an absolutely phenomenal ability. We have artifact creatures, we have enchantment creatures, and then we just plain out have strong artifacts and enchantments in the game anyways as supports. And since this is going to return all of them from the graveyard to the battlefield under your control, I could really see someone having a lot of fun making some kind of crazy shenanigan deck that is going to dump a whole bunch of stuff into your graveyard, and then you're just going to go ahead and bring all of it back with one cast of Brilliant Restoration and kill your opponent in one hit. So I could see this pairing really well with that. I could see this pairing really well with a deck that's going to wheel your hand. That means discard and then redraw the hand. There's going to be a number of ways that you're going to be able to dump stuff in your graveyard. If sagas wind up being really strong, this is going to be a great card to pair with sagas because you just play out your sagas and then use Brilliant Restoration to bring them all back. So there's really quite a lot that you can do with this card, and I like it. I like it a lot as just like a really cool card to play around with. This seems more like a Training Grounds hero to me because it has such combo potential while costing 18 mana and requiring you to build up before you cast it, rather than something that I'd run in an event. But nonetheless, it seems like it could have quite a lot of power, and that's always fun to look out for in a new set. The next card is going to be Eiganjo, Seat of the Empire. This is going to be the white channel land, and so it is going to convert 2 gems to white. The channel is only going to cost you 4 mana, but will do 4 damage to the first opposing creature with the greatest power. And like with the green land and the other lands in its cycle, when a creature with legendary enters the battlefield under your control, if this is in your hand, it gets 3 mana. So this is going to give you a way of potentially getting rid of your opponent's creatures. It's going to give you some sort of removal while also giving you gem conversion, which is solid. Being only able to only do 4 damage really means that it's not going to serve as a great removal. It's just that every so often you'll play a match and you will be able to get rid of something for this. In general, I personally would probably rather just convert the gems to white and get this thing down as conversion, but maybe your opponent does play a lower toughness creature that this would be able to get rid of. Next up is going to be Invoke Calamity. So this is a 10 mana spell where you're going to pick 2 of the first 4 spells that cost 6 or less from your graveyard, fetch them, give them full mana, and have them gain Outcast. So I could see this pairing really well with cards that have a channel in their cost, right? I believe it's channel. It's where they have X in their cost, right? It's where you get to build up the mana. So something like Shatterskull Smashing, which costs 6 mana, but then you can store, maybe it's stored mana. You can store up to 10 mana. So cards like this tend to give full stored mana to those cards as well. And so this is going to be a card that, especially since red has a lot of really good wheeling effects, things like Valakut Awakening, I could really see someone getting a lot of value out of Invoke Calamity. You could also use this in conjunction with, for example, Rawl. That's going to work really well with Rawl, as Rawl's first ability is going to fetch cards and give them mana, but it's also going to dump cards in the graveyard. And this Rawl obviously wants to cast a lot of spells. Rawl is a spell-based planeswalker, so this is a card that I think is going to potentially be able to get a lot of play. Furthermore, you could wind up running this with, what's it called, Wizard class. You could run it with Alchemist's Gambit, see if this winds up giving the full cleave cost to Alchemist's Gambit. That's only 4 mana, so there's really a lot of spells that you could target with Invoke Calamity to get back from your graveyard and just get a tremendous amount of value for 10 mana. So this is definitely a card that you want to keep your eyes out for. Even if you're not looking at red, by the way, like let's say you're looking at other colors, I mean, you could have this with like Rishkar's Expertise in Legacy, you could have this with Animist's Awakening in Standard, you could have it with Green Gem Conversion. There's really a lot that you can pair with this. Next up is going to be Isshin, 2 Heavens as 1. So Isshin is definitely an interesting card in that it's 12 for a 3/4, it's 3 colors, and has, when you match only 3 gems, gain an extra swap. This can trigger up to 1 time per turn. So that means that basically every single turn, as long as you make a 3 swap, you're going to get an extra match. So you get an extra swap basically every single turn in either white, black, or red. So that's definitely very solid because that's going to serve as a bunch of mana and also potentially as a bunch of loyalty. So Isshin, 2 Heavens as 1 is definitely going to be a really cool card. It got too hot. The sweater had to go. But Isshin, well, probably hotter than it is here. Good card. You want it. Light Paws, Emperor's Voice. So this thing is either going to be a problem or it's going to get nerfed. It's going to be one of the two. There's going to be no in between here. So Light Paws, Emperor's Voice is a 12 mana creature. It's a 2/2. It has the level up mechanic. And it has, when you cast an aura card, this card's level becomes equal to the converted mana cost of the aura. So their wording is just fine. When you cast an aura, the level becomes X. X is equal to that card's cost. Then you're going to pick one of the first 4 aura or enchantment cards with a mana value equal to or less than this card's level from your library, fetch it, and give that card full mana. So the reason I'm saying that this is going to be a problem if it's not changed is because if it comes out as when you cast an aura, this card's level becomes equal to the aura's mana cost, then fetch the next aura with a mana cost equal to or less than that card's level, then if you run a single aura deck, this card goes infinite the moment you cast an aura. So there are a number of planeswalkers that make it really easy to cast auras. I'm thinking of, as an example, Daxos, whose first ability only costs 4 loyalty and fetches an aura. So you could play Light Paws with Daxos and go infinite for pretty much nothing. So this would be a huge problem. I'm very hopeful that this gets changed. When I say that I want it to get changed, I just want them to get rid of equal to. Just get rid of equal to. So I'd love it if it was this ability, but pick one of the next 4 aura or enchantment cards with a mana cost or the mana value that is less than this card's level. Give that card full mana. So you'd still be able to get some shenanigans going, but it just wouldn't be infinite nonsense. So this brings us to the blue land. The blue land is Otawara Soaring City. So Otawara is probably the best of the lands, I think. So it converts to blue, which is obviously what makes it the best, because the best magic card is just an island, right? That should be part of the Power 9. It's just 9 different art islands, but no, really. So this thing has Channel 4. So if this thing has 4 or more mana, Return target creature to its owner's hand. If you can't, return an opposing Excuse me, I have a cough. Opposing Vanguard support to its owner's hand. If you can't, return an opposing artifact support or enchantment support to its owner's hand. So basically, for 4 mana, you get to bounce a creature. And it doesn't specify like if they have 5 cards or less. So this can kill a creature if your opponent's hand is full. You're also, if they don't have a creature, you get to bounce a Vanguard. If they don't have a Vanguard, then you're going to return an artifact or enchantment. So 4 mana to bounce anything except for a land is really, really good. And then on top of that, it's also going to serve as gem conversion. So no matter which way things go with Otawara, this is an absolutely fantastic card. And this is the one of the lands that you're going to want to make sure you get your hands on the most. Next up is the red land. It is called Socanzon, Crucible of Defiance. So it's going to convert 2 to red. And then for the channel 4, you're going to create 2 Kamigawa colorless spirit tokens and give them haste. So we don't know what the power toughness of those Kamigawa colorless spirit tokens is. My guess is that they're going to be 1/1s, maybe 2/2s. So I don't think that this is a particularly good ability on the land, but it's nonetheless going to be a converter, which is always solid. You always want to have as much conversion as you reasonably can in a deck. Which brings us to the black one, which is called Takenuma, Abandoned Mire. So Takenuma is going to destroy the top 3 cards of your library for channel, and then you get to return the first creature or Vanguard from your graveyard to your hand. So this one's actually pretty okay for the channel ability. It pales in comparison to both the green and blue, but I feel like that's generally how things go in Puzzle Quest. Green and blue tend to be the best colors, and then the others try and emulate them in some way. Destroying cards is pretty good. I do like that. Converting is obviously great. Returning something from the graveyard to your hand I don't actually like too much, but that's just more because I'd rather just bring something out directly into play. That said, if this thing had channel 4 to bring something directly into play, then it would have been absolutely insane. On par with the blue one, for that matter. So, yeah, Takenuma is good, but of the new land cycle, you definitely want to target the blue one. So let's go ahead and move on over to uncommons. For the uncommons, there's actually like a surprisingly decent number of good uncommons in this set. So the first of them is Anchor to Reality. So this is more of just a cool card. There are a number of planeswalkers who are able to make artifact supports on the battlefield just with loyalty abilities. There's a lot of things that make gold tokens right now. And so it's really not that hard to get an artifact support on the battlefield. So this is going to be 12 mana to destroy a random artifact support you control, and then pick one of the first 4 artifacts from your library, fetch it, and give it full mana. So this is a great way to get a free creature, or to get like a Pyromancer's Goggles or something like that. The only downside to this is really that it destroys a random artifact support you control, and so if you're using this to fetch an artifact support, you might wind up destroying it if you cast other like subsequent copies of Anchor to Reality. So this is more a card that I think will be fun to play with in the training grounds, rather than a card that I think will be good in events. But still, it's really cool for an uncommon to do that. So before I get into Banishing Slash, a lot of the uncommons you're going to notice there's going to be a pretty similar theme in that the uncommons in this set are providing us with a lot of really good removal. And so it's always nice to have a lot of removal in the uncommon range because it makes it more accessible. And so this set has phenomenal removal in the uncommon range. So the first of them is going to be Banishing Slash. So this one is 8 mana. It's going to destroy an opposing support with the artifact or enchantment subtype. I'm kind of curious, since it says random opposing support, if that just means that that's like them signing that there's maybe going to be some way of destroying more targeted supports in the near future, because otherwise it could just say destroy an opposing support with the artifact or enchantment subtype. It doesn't need to say random. So just makes me wonder. I'm hopeful. That's why I'm saying this. I don't have any information as to whether or not they're going to do that. So this is going to destroy a support, and if you can't destroy a support, then you're going to destroy the first opposing creature without vigilance. And then if you control an artifact and an enchantment, you're going to create a samurai token. I'm going to guess that the samurais are going to be 2/2s, which is not particularly impressive. But nonetheless, that this could destroy an artifact, enchantment, or creature is pretty solid. Having the without vigilance is a little bit of a bummer, because it's not going to be able to get rid of some of the biggest threats in the format, things like Velomachus, but Nonetheless, if you don't have things like Fateful Absence or some of the other better white removal cards that we have right now at our disposal, then this will be a pretty good stand-in for you. Invoke Despair is absolutely bonkers. This card is incredible. So this is a 15 mana black removal card. And it is going to destroy the first opposing creature, destroy an opposing enchantment, and destroy an opposing vanguard. And if you cannot destroy a creature because they don't have one, or you cannot destroy an enchantment because they don't have one, or you cannot destroy a vanguard because they don't have one, then your opponent's going to lose 2 life and you're going to draw a card. So this could potentially destroy 3 things. It could potentially make your opponent lose 6 life and you draw 3 cards. It could be you destroy a creature, make your opponent lose 4 life and draw 2 cards. It could be you just destroy a creature and enchantment and draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. So really, whichever way you look at this, you're kind of in a good position if you kill something, and you're kind of in a good position if you don't kill something. So this is just an absolutely phenomenal card all the way around. Being able to destroy enchantments in black is huge. Being able to destroy creatures and vanguards is pretty par for the course for black. But this is kind of like a cheap casualty of war, which was a staple in pretty much all green and black decks when you had that card back with War of the Spark. So this is maybe the black removal card that I want the most, or maybe even just the removal card for the set, apart from the Mythic Saga that I want the most. But I could see this being a card that you're going to see in a lot of decks, especially with the power creep with mana bonuses being a lot higher now. This 15 mana for this effect really is not that prohibitive. So this is a phenomenal card. Next up, we have Invoke the Winds. So once again, 15 mana. So here we have Invoke Despair, and now here we get the blue version, Invoke the Winds. So Invoke the Winds is 15 to gain control of target opposing creature. That creature gains vigilance until the beginning of your next turn if you can't gain control of an opposing artifact support. So this is a really good card because not only does it get rid of something on the opponent's side of the battlefield, but it puts it on your side of the battlefield. So you're kind of getting super card advantage here by getting rid of something from your opponent's side, but then giving it to yourself. So this card is really good. Giving that creature vigilance means that you could wind up like taking their most powerful creature and then having it block to kill the rest of their creatures, which is really nice. I wouldn't really use it to gain control of an artifact support. I'd rather just hold on to it to steal an opponent's creature. But yeah, so this is also another one of those cards that's really good. I think it's better for players who don't have as good of a collection, but have maybe advanced into gold or platinum a little more quickly than they would like to have, because this way you're going to be able to steal some good stuff. Nonetheless, with the way that Fiblethip has shaken out in terms of what's been entering Fiblethip's vault as the alternate art cards, I feel like most players have access to some pretty nasty bombs. So this is going to be a great way of stealing those. And at the very least, if you're up against something like Savior of Olenbach, you don't have to worry about getting rid of it and having a whole bunch of other things enter the battlefield because you just get it yourself. So when this creature dies, effects aren't going to happen for you stealing the opponent's card. So really good card there. We've also actually got some really good conversion in the uncommon range, which is really nice. We've got 2 converters that are going to convert to your planeswalker colors. If you know me, you know that I love to run monocolor planeswalkers, so this type of land is huge for monocolor planeswalkers. You probably don't really want to run this so much with dual and tricolor walkers, but with a monocolor walker, this is great. So this is 9 mana to convert 2 to your planeswalker's colors, and then when this support is destroyed, you're going to draw a card, and if you control an artifact, that card gains 3 mana. If you control an enchantment, that card gains 3 mana. So when this is destroyed, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, then you draw a card and that card gains 6 mana. If you control just one, it gets 3 mana. And if you control neither, then you just draw a card. So nonetheless, you're still getting something out of this getting destroyed, so it's not like any kind of loss for putting this in a deck. The Secluded Courtyard is kind of just like a slightly better version of the previous converter in a way, because it's going to convert 2 gems to your planeswalker colors. But if you have at least 3 different creatures that share a type in your library, you're going to convert 3 gems to your planeswalker colors. So there really aren't that many gem converters that convert 3 to a color. And so Secluded Courtyard is going to be another way that you could just add another convert 3 to your deck. And just once again, with the power creep and mana bonuses getting higher and higher, these lands that convert 3 to a planeswalker are just becoming even more valuable. So this is definitely a card that you want to look out for as you're opening your packs, because if you like running monocolor walkers like I do, you're going to get a tremendous amount of value for this land. Which brings us to Socanzon Smelter. So this is 6 mana for a 2/2. And it has when an artifact support you control is destroyed during your turn, create 2 construct tokens. Those creatures gain haste until end of turn. I'm going to venture a guess and say that the construct tokens are just going to be 1/1s. So when an artifact support you control is destroyed during your turn, put 2/2 with haste on the battlefield. But what makes this thing so crazy is that you can pair this with Old Gnawbone, and I know that Old Gnawbone has come up a bunch so far in this video, but that's just because there's a bunch of artifact synergy in the set, and Old Gnawbone is the best way of making as many artifact tokens as you can on the board. So with this, it's going to make it so that when all of the gold tokens get destroyed, for each of the gold tokens that gets destroyed, you're going to put a 2/2 out. And so as you put out more and more tokens for the gold tokens getting destroyed, those are going to get bigger and bigger, which are going to make even more of the gold tokens. So you're just going to get a ton of mana, a ton of creatures, and you're just going to be able to just smash through your opponent with Gnawbone and the Socanzon Smelter. So I really like the 2 of them as a 1/2 punch that you could throw together in a deck. And then you just build the rest of your deck around whatever other cards that you want to build that deck around. But really, really good pairing with Gnawbone. Soul Transfer is going to be another phenomenal removal card in the uncommon range. So it's 8 mana, which is really nice. That means you only need to have a Planeswalker mana bonus of 5 to be able to cast it for 1 match. And given that dual color walkers, there we have a bunch of them with +5 to their mana bonuses, this is going to be a pretty easy one to cast. And it's going to exile an opposing Vanguard support. If they don't have a support, then you're going to exile target opposing creature. Then if you control an artifact and an enchantment, return the first creature or Vanguard from your graveyard to your hand. So this is just going to do a whole bunch for you. It's only 8 mana. You're going to exile a Vanguard or a creature, which is really good. And then on top of that, you're also going to potentially be able to bring something back from the graveyard, which is also very good. So I don't like this one as much as cards that are going to destroy the creature first, because you don't always want to destroy the Vanguard first, especially if your opponent has like some of the crummy Vanguards. But by and large, if your opponent has a Vanguard out, you probably got a good reason to destroy it. So this is a phenomenal card to add to your collection. So that's going to do it for the uncommons, and that brings us to a surprising number of commons. So for our commons, you'll see that we've got 6 of them over here, which is pretty good. Some of them are actually really great cards, and others are just cards that I would suggest for newer players. So I've been playing for the last few weeks exclusively on my free-to-play new account, and so it's given me a little bit better insight as to what are some cards to look out for newer players, rather than people who just have everything. So hopefully this will help some of you guys. So Assassin's Ink, this is going to be 9 mana. If you cast an artifact or enchantment, if this is in your hand, it's going to gain 3 mana. So that's pretty nice. It just starts filling by you casting other cards. And then it's going to destroy an opposing Vanguard support. And if you can't, destroy target opposing creature. So it's kind of like that 8 mana spell that we just looked at that's uncommon, but it costs 1 more mana. And instead of exiling, it's going to destroy, and it doesn't bring anything back, but it has a way of charging up more mana. So still a really good card, and definitely one that I would suggest keeping an eye out for and throwing in some decks, because removal is always nice to have, and so there's just a ton of it in this set. Blossomrancer is 13 mana for a 4/4 with reach, and it has when this creature enters the battlefield, pick one of the first 4 creature or enchantment cards from your library, fetch that card, and gain 4 life. So this is really good for players, especially in bronze, silver, and gold, who need to complete cast creature objectives. So cast creature objectives can actually be kind of tricky sometimes at that range, just because there aren't a lot of creature fetch cards in standard right now, especially at the lower rarities. You get Gather the Pack, which is an uncommon in Origins, but beyond that, you really don't have very much. So Blossomrancer is going to serve as a way of basically getting 2 creature casts for 1, in that you cast it and then you're going to pick a creature from your library and fetch that card. So if you are running 3 or fewer creatures, there's a very reasonable chance that you'll be able to fetch another Blossomrancer from the fetch as well. And so you just get to keep fetching those and bringing them out. Having Reach will provide you with some protection, and so this would definitely be a card to look out for if you're in Bronze and Silver, especially. Boon of Bosseju. This is a card that you're going to want to keep an eye out for regardless of what tier you're in. This card is insanely powerful, and it's crazy that it's a common to me. So that's really, really cool. So this is 9 mana. It's a spell, and target creature you control gets +X and Vigilance until the beginning of your next turn, where X is equal to the greatest base mana cost among creatures you control. So in green, you're probably going to be running some kind of really nasty big baddie. If you're running something like Gaia's Revenge, then you're going to give a creature +23 and Vigilance until the beginning of your next turn for 9 mana, which is super fantastic. And I mean, even if you're running like middle of the road green creatures, you're probably going to have something out that's like 15 mana. So at the very least, you're probably going to be giving something 15 in Vigilance until the beginning of your next turn. And if you give this boost to something like Obun, which is going to pass on its power to other things, or if you give this to, it's called like a Layla or the Rangers. It's a common legend with Reach and First Strike. It's like 10 mana for a 2/3 First Strike Reach or something. You put this thing on it, and whenever you enter combat, its power is given permanently to another creature you control. So you put this thing on that, it blocks and kills all your opponent's creatures and gives this as a permanent buff to another creature you control. So maybe Halni Rangers? I don't know. I'm getting the name all mixed up. I have the art in my head. It's a really good card, really good pairing, really easy to pair with this thing as well. So Boon of Bosseju is a card that you're going to want to keep your eyes out for because it's really, really good. Which brings us to Dockside Chef. Dockside Chef is a 7 mana 1/2. When an artifact support you control is destroyed, draw a card. I think you can maybe guess why I have this card here. Once again, we're going to bring up Old Gnawbone, but basically you're just going to make a whole bunch of gold tokens, and whenever any of those gold tokens are destroyed, you're going to draw a card and gain 3 mana. So Dockside Chef is another card that's going to pair really well with Gnawbone. I know we have a lot that pairs well with Gnawbone in this set, but yeah, I bring it up so much mainly because Gnawbone is accessible through Fiblethip. If Gnawbone was just a mythic that wasn't so accessible, then I would not be adding all these different cards here that pair really well with Gnawbone. But since Gnawbone is very accessible, I feel okay with putting them in. Which brings us to Gravelighter. Gravelighter is a 9 mana 2/2 spirit that has, when it enters the battlefield, destroy the first other creature each player controls. So this card right here is going to be great for destroy creature objectives because it's going to get rid of your opponent's creatures, but also it could potentially get rid of 2 creatures at once by destroying one of yours. From the way that it looks, you're probably not going to need to have another creature out in order for this creature to take effect. So if you just play this and your opponent has a creature out, then you're just going to destroy their creature and not destroy one of your own. So, I mean, this isn't like the greatest card ever or the greatest thing since sliced bread because, I mean, we've got a bunch of other removal in black in the common and uncommon range that's really, really good. But nonetheless, if you don't have a lot of resources to be picking up a lot of packs, then you just wind up opening 1 or 2 premium packs of the set, then this could be a pretty good thing for you to keep your eyes out for, just because removal is always nice to have in the bag. And then finally, we have Spinning Wheel Kick, another one that's surprising that it's a common. This card is really good. So this is a 9 mana green spell that has your first creature deals damage equal to its power to up to 2 target opposing creatures. And if you want, you can channel this, so you can exile it from your hand if it has 6 or more mana, and make an opposing Vanguard support lose X shield, where X is the power of your first creature. So while you do need a creature in order for this to take effect, this is really nice in that you can cast it to destroy 2 creatures, or you can just exile it from your hand to destroy an opposing Vanguard. So either way, it's kind of varied in what you can do with it, but it's definitely going to net you more than you're getting for having the card in your deck. So green tends to struggle with removal, especially at the lower rarities. And so this is going to be a great way of having some very solid removal in your deck at those lower rarities. And especially for you newer players who are more likely playing a lot more with green, because green is the most accessible color at the beginning of the game. So that does it for all the cards that I'm keeping an eye out for. It goes all the way from Masterpiece down to Common. If I missed anything that you're really looking for, please go ahead and let me know in the comments. I always wind up reading through all of those, and it gives me some ideas for things to tinker with when the set drops. So I love seeing other things that maybe I missed that I could try and play around with. So if you say, this is the card that I'm interested in, tell me why. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.